This past week has been super design heavy. All of the background research and ideation has been performed. And so now it's time for that nitty gritty actual Figma work of designing the actual screens for my product. And honestly, this past week, I still felt like I was playing catch up from the week before, and I never really got caught up. I'm still about 2 to 3 days behind what the timeline wants me to be, so I'm still catching up in that regard. Now, a mentor told me that I can get an extension on my timeline if I don't make it in the 8 weeks, but personally, I'm not wanting to do that. I want to make it a personal challenge of mine to just get it done in the 8 weeks no matter what. So the first thing that I was working on this week was I was finishing up the screens for each of the 3 user flows that I designed. So basically I'm designing an application to help musicians collaborate with other musicians more easily. And this was my first time doing this, so it took a very long time. One thing that helped a lot is that I used a website called Dribbble, which shows a lot of templates for different screens. So I'm able to draw inspiration from different login screens, home screens, scheduling screens, and confirmation screens so that I'm not having to just come up with everything custom and from scratch. I met with my mentor and she was helpful too with some of my design choices. Like for example, for some of my screens, I didn't have a back button, which would have been helpful to have. And then for a couple of my screens, some of the icons were not consistent from screen to screen. And so she mentioned or asked me why that was the case. And I didn't really have a reason. So it definitely gave me the thought to continuously ask myself why when I'm designing the screens that I make. But I finally submitted my screens this past Wednesday and got them approved by a mentor on Slack, which meant it was time to move on to wireframing. Now there is a ton of content on Avocademy for this particular subject, like hours of it. There's articles, there's videos, and in this course, they use Figma for their wireframes, but they said that, we can use either Sketch or Adobe XD, but in the course, when Maka is doing demonstrations, she uses Figma. So that's what I use to follow along with. And she has a really helpful video that's probably an hour long that goes through a lot of incredibly useful tips to just speed up workflow in Figma. And I found that I use those a lot when it came to designing my wireframes. The hardest part I found with Figma was really just kind of nitpicky stuff. Like for example, if I wanted to make multiple buttons, sometimes even if I thought they were aligned correctly and centered on the screen, if I zoomed in, they weren't. And so I had to nudge it over a few pixels. So it was really just, I'm sure there's probably better ways of doing that, but I just found nitpicky things like aligning and making sure things are exactly the same size were a little bit tricky to do with Figma. One thing that did help a lot was something called a wireframing kit. So there's a community section on Figma and you can get what's called a wireframing kit. And this has a lot of common assets that are used on apps. For example, it has icons and input fields, search fields, radio buttons, and just other common things that you would find in an app so that I don't have to design it from scratch. I can just sort of copy and paste from the wireframing kit onto my wireframes, and it saves just a boatload of time and also makes it look quite nice too. Now, as far as wireframing as a process, I actually enjoyed it, but it can get quite redundant. And because there's a lot of nitpicky things, especially as it relates to sizing things and aligning things to make them fit within proper UI guidelines and things like that. So because of that, I couldn't really work continuously for more than about an hour before I would either make lazy designs or let things slide that I wouldn't ordinarily let slide. So one thing that helped a lot is that I used a Pomodoro timer, which is a timer where I work for 25 minutes and then it beeps and then I take a 5-minute break and I do something completely unrelated. And then it kind of cycles through that. And I found that that helped immensely when it came to just staying productive with doing a task such as wireframing. So I would say it took around 4 to 5 hours to make my first iteration of wireframes, which they're calling it low fidelity wireframes. And so I just submitted them earlier today, and so I will be awaiting to see if they're approved or not. But truthfully, I'm not aiming for them to be perfect at this stage. If anything, this course has taught me to not strive for perfection, which is something I ordinarily do. And I've had multiple mentors sort of tell me or give me permission to not try to make things perfect. And that's sort of been further reinforced because I'm reading a book called Lean UX. And in that book, it basically talks about how pretty much the first iteration of any product design is a failure. Either a full failure or a partial failure. And any design choice that goes into that product is just an assumption until it is tested by a user. So I'm trying to adopt that mindset of anything that I make is just an assumption and is just an idea for a user to test. And the quicker that I can get that user feedback, then the more that I can iterate again and then again get feedback and sort of just go on this loop of iteration until it becomes a product that a user enjoys. So as far as next steps for me for Avocademy, I have to, one, get my low fidelity wireframes approved, and then once those are approved, then I have to do my medium fidelity wireframes. So anything where I've put just a box as a placeholder for an icon, or maybe I just have placeholder text, I have to replace that with the actual text that I would use in the product design. And then the other thing I have to work on that technically was already due is the brand platform, mood board, and style guide. I don't really know what those are, but my guess is that they have to do with establishing what the overall style of the product design is going to be. So I'll be working on that this week as well. So overall, I'm very much enjoying the Avocademy Bootcamp. It definitely is a learn by doing type class, which was something that I was initially hesitant on just because when I take courses, I'm used to there being a lot of long videos to watch, doing deep dives before actually diving into doing things. But I'm finding that this is a much more efficient process. And while it is more uncomfortable to dive in when I don't feel like I have that great of a grasp on things, those calls that I have with a mentor really are more valuable than me just trying to learn by watching videos. And as a side note, for another thing I really love about Avocademy, I've talked about this in one of our previous videos, but I just love going to the Slack channel and there's a wins tab there, and I'll just go to that and just see the wins that people have. It honestly gets updated probably once a day, maybe once every other day, with someone who has gotten a job offer from someone who has completed Avocademy. And I'm not shitting you when a lot of those are above 95K, above 100K, a lot of those with sign-on bonuses as well. I think the highest offer that I saw someone get was $115,000 and a sign-on bonus. So I'm like, holy shit. When I think about it, I went to school for 7 years to be a physical therapist, and like the capped salary that a therapist typically makes in my kind of a setting is maybe 100K at the very, very top. To think that some of these people are making this just coming out of a boot camp, and it's honestly just wild to see, and I love going there, and it just motivates me. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more about Avocademy, I have a link in the description below. It is an affiliate link, so if you want to help support this channel, then that is a great way to do so. And you can also save $100 off of the Avocademy Foundations Bootcamp by using the code SAVE100. That should still be an active link, or at least it says so in the course, so you can do that and save a little money on it. And until next time, I'll be sure to update you next week with how I'm doing with my journey with becoming a UX designer. And I will see you in the next video.